Hello, welcome to the latest GSO awardee presentation from the McMaster Health Forum at McMaster University in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. I'm going to provide you with a quick summary of the McMaster Health Forum and the Global Skills Opportunity Program. Then I'm going to turn things over to our GSO awardee, Kenneth Chen, who's going to outline what he did in his internship at the University of Sydney in Australia. The McMaster Health Forum aims to be the leading hub for improving health outcomes through collective problem solving. We harness information, convene stakeholders, and prepare action-oriented leaders to act as an agent of change by empowering stakeholders. The Global Skills Opportunity Student Mobility Projects aim to empower Canadian students, especially underrepresented students, to take advantage of international learning experiences and to develop skills such as problem solving, adaptability, resilience, and intercultural competency. While open to all undergraduate students, the national program targets groups for whom international experiences have traditionally been less accessible, specifically Indigenous students, students from low-income backgrounds, and those with disabilities. It also aims to diversify the destination countries where Canadian students pursue international learning. The McMaster Health Forum is proud to have been selected to host a Global Skills Opportunity Student Mobility Project from October 2021 to March 2025. This project will enable emerging leaders with McMaster University's undergraduate community to build knowledge and skills to support health and social system strengthening internationally. We will leverage McMaster Health Forum's programs to support skills development in policy, political, and systems analysis, evidence synthesis, and stakeholder engagement, while building on our experience with student mentorship, leadership development, and facilitating international exchange. Over the first 2 years of the program, the McMaster Health Forum worked with 9 GSO awardees who engaged with various international partners in India, South Africa, and Trinidad and Tobago. In the second half of the program, the forum will work with 9 GSO awardees who will engage with international partners in Australia, India, Kosovo, and South Africa. Today's presenter is Kenneth, who at the time of his GSO internship was in the Honours Bachelor of Health Sciences program at McMaster University with an interdisciplinary minor in community engagement. Kenneth has interests in health policy, community engagement, global affairs, and sustainability, and intends to leverage community engagement to inform policies that address the social and environmental determinants of health. Through his GSO internship, Kenneth hoped to hone his skills in research and gain deeper insights into its nexus to health policy and decision-making processes. Kenneth, over to you.
Thank you for joining me as I share my Global Skills Opportunity experience at the University of Sydney in 2024. My name is Kenneth, and I am a recent graduate of the Honours Health Sciences program at McMaster University with a minor in community engagement. I am also a research assistant with the McMaster Health Forum. My areas of interest include human security, health policy, global health, migration and forced displacement, and the role that climate change plays in all of the above. For my GSO, I had an opportunity to travel to the University of Sydney in Sydney, New South Wales, Australia. There, I split my time between the Prevention Research Collaboration and Sydney Health Partners Implementation Science Academy, which are both housed under the Charles Perkins Centre at the University of Sydney campus. In terms of the work that I was involved in, I worked on a systematic review to examine how equity is considered in scalability assessment tools. This was building on previous work that was done in this space, which identified a list of scalability assessment tools for innovations in health. Now, to understand what scalability assessment tools are, it's important to understand the rationale behind scaling. So, health innovations that show evidence of effectiveness in research settings could be scaled up to realize population-wide benefits. However, this is not the reality globally, as innovations with evidence of effectiveness have not necessarily been able to reach those that could benefit from them most. And the importance of scaling is that they could help reduce health system waste and improve health outcomes. And this is where the concept of scalability comes in, because not all health innovations are suitable for scaling. So the assessment of scalability has become an important first step in the scaling process, to prevent, among other things, the waste of resources and effort that need to be invested into scaling potentially unsuitable innovations, and to prevent the replication of known harms at scale. Scalability assessment tools take this process one step further by providing tools that formalize the scalability assessment process for end users, such as policymakers, to identify evidence-based innovations to be scaled up. And here is an example of a scalability assessment tool that members of my research team have developed. This one in particular looked at areas of scalability, including, for example, evidence of effectiveness, which is a given. And another example includes fidelity and adaptation, which is interested in looking at the extent to which an innovation can or cannot be modified to suit its implementation context. Now, back to the project that I was working on in examining how equity is considered in scalability assessment tools. There's a growing recognition that equity needs to be considered in scalability assessment because equity could be inherent in the definition of scaling up. And the implication for not considering equity is that it could lead to poor health outcomes if concerns of intended beneficiaries are overlooked. So to do this, I extracted the tools that have been identified based on previous work looking at scalability assessment tools, and I performed a round of qualitative data analysis to understand how equity is considered in these tools. I worked with my research team closely, and I met with them weekly, if not more often, to iteratively develop a codebook to thematically analyze how equity is considered in these tools. We then updated the search strategy to identify more scalability assessment tools that have been developed since the publication of this previous work, and we're currently in the process of screening, which is to be followed by another round of qualitative data analysis once the new tools have been identified. In terms of my work with the Sydney Health Partners Implementation Science Academy, which is an initiative of Sydney Health Partners, a partnership between 5 local health districts in and around Sydney, the University of Sydney, and 10 medical research institutes. The goal of the Implementation Science Academy is to advance the implementation of research in health practice and policy through methodological innovations in the field of implementation science, strengthening workforce capacity and capability for implementation science, and leveraging collaboration and partnerships to enhance research translation in clinical settings. My work was to provide operational support to the Implementation Science Academy by performing data analysis to understand the level of engagement by different parties with the various programs and initiatives of the Academy in order to inform their strategy for how they might target an expanded reach of their various programs and initiatives. While there, I had an opportunity to attend the Sydney Health Partners Annual Forum, where I listened to a panel of speakers consisting of professors, practitioners, and health policy makers discussing the theme of the forum on supporting translational research and strengthening research translation. Of course, it wasn't all work and no play. I had plenty of opportunities to go on many adventures during my time in Australia. One cannot go to Sydney without exploring the Sydney Opera House, which was actually one of the first places that I went to in Sydney. I remember when I got there, because I simply could not contain my excitement about the place. I remember I found the first ferry out to the water, which was supposedly where you could get the best view of the Sydney Opera House. So I did that. I took a ferry out, did a short loop in the harbor that went nowhere, just so that I could catch a glimpse of the Sydney Opera House from the water. and I have photographed the place many times from different angles, left and right, inside and out, front and back, night and day. And I have been back to the Sydney Opera House several times. I was probably there every weekend because I could not get tired of looking at the architecture of the building. I also had an opportunity to join an architectural tour of the Sydney Opera House, where I learned about the inspiring story of courage, vision, and persistence that went into the construction of this building, which took 14 years to build. And it was named a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and one of the only places to be designated as such while the architect is still alive. I was lucky to arrive at Sydney during their annual Festival of Light, Music and Ideas, Vivid Sydney, where there were light projections onto the facades of buildings throughout the city, the Sydney Harbour Bridge, and the Sydney Opera House as well. I would probably say that this show kept me well distracted during the long nights of Australian winter. And of course, I visited the zoo in Australia, as one does, which is where you could get one of the best views of the Sydney skyline, as pictured here, because it is on the other side of the harbour. I saw koalas for the first time, which was what I was after, and kangaroos as well. And I surprisingly also saw some spiders, which were thankfully the only spiders that I saw in Australia during my entire time there. I did not see any at home. And of course, I also visited the beaches in Sydney, which is what they're known for. These are world-renowned beaches. And I had a chance to see the waves, which seemed big and scary, but I only saw them from afar, and I did not want to dip my feet in them because it was winter and it was cold, but it was still a sight to behold. Towards the middle of my trip in Australia, I flew north for warmer weather to the Great Barrier Reef, where I got the opportunity to snorkel for the first time ever. This was the largest coral reef system anywhere in the world, and I got to learn from marine biologists about the process of formation of the coral reef and, unfortunately, the effects of climate change on coral reef bleaching, as well as efforts to protect this important ecosystem, which helps to provide a protection from erosion for coastal areas. This was also another UNESCO World Heritage Site in addition to Sydney Opera House. And I was hoping to see some turtles here, although I did not spot any. But I did see a stingray and what appeared to look like a baby shark, which I'm still not entirely sure if that was a shark, but I'm going to pretend like it was so that I can tell the story that I swam with a shark. I also had an opportunity to do some sightseeing around Sydney, where I visited the famous Sydney Harbour Bridge, as well as the Sydney Eye Tower, and the Spice Alley, which was a place that housed a diverse mix of Asian cuisines. I also visited the Chinatown, the Sydney Fish Market, which offered fresh seafood, fresh and delicious seafood, and also here at the Queen Victoria Building. There were many interesting learnings and observations that I made in Sydney. I learned that it has one of the most expensive housing markets in the world, which was something that I experienced firsthand, having to find accommodation in the city. I had a chance to visit the museum at the University of Sydney campus, where I learned about the indigenous history of the land and the Gadigal people, which were the indigenous inhabitants of the Sydney area. I also learned that what we know as streetcars back home in Canada are actually called trams in Australia and apparently much of the rest of the world. I also noticed that the sky in Australia is particularly blue. It's a very deep shade of blue. I was told that Australia has a thinner layer of ozone over on top, which is partly responsible for its high rates of skin cancer, which is among the highest in the world. Besides the sky that is blue, it also has its fair share of rainy days, and when it does rain in Sydney, it pours, and this kind of downpour can sustain for many, many hours. I also noticed that soft drinks were quite expensive in Australia. I saw a case of Coke, which was on sale for 28 Australian dollars, which was quite a bit, but the regular price was actually $47 for a case of Coke. Something that I really appreciated about Australia was that dining out was relatively inexpensive compared to back home, because tipping culture is not a thing, and the prices that I see in the menus is what I pay when I go to pay at the end of my meal, where I don't have to run into the surprise of taxes and tip. I also learned that Australia has quite a sophisticated coffee culture, and that I couldn't just walk up to a counter to order a coffee with X number of cream and sugar, but rather I could only order mostly espresso-based drinks, and flat white became my go-to coffee of choice, which may or may not have been invented in Australia. And I had a flat white every day at the office, and everywhere I went, I got a flat white in Australia. To wrap up my GSO experience, there are a few reflections that I want to make. This trip has profoundly transformed my perspectives on life. It has been a trip of many firsts, where I got to experience driving on the other side of the road for the first time, which really isn't as scary or difficult as it seems. I also got to experience solo travel for the first time, which is something that I now feel inspired to do for the rest of my 20s. I learned to be resourceful, as I had to constantly problem solve and think on my feet, which has really helped me build confidence in my ability to make travel plans and to execute them by myself in a foreign country. Overall, I learned that there's often much to be discovered on the other side of many of life's imaginary fears. Professionally, I was grateful to have gained an exposure to how research is done at another academic institution, but specifically in a foreign country. And it was also here that I got to try out a different pace of office work environment, and I got to see what possibilities might exist for me out there in terms of career options, with a possibility for international mobility. So overall, I learned a lot about work, life, and the work culture in Australia, and I feel inspired to pursue new experiences in the future. So that is all. Thank you for joining me on my GSO journey and adventure to Sydney, Australia.
We hope that you enjoyed our latest GSO awardee webinar. If you're interested in the Master Health Forum and our various programs, there are links on the screen now. You can also follow us on social media and our website at mcmasterforum.org.